Greetings and welcome to this edition of The People's Voice, produced and presented by your host, Shabnam, Palesa, Mohamed for SPM Media. It's the 18th of July, 2021. We are broadcasting live from South Africa. Before I introduce our critical topic and our brilliant guest, let's remind you that we're broadcasting on YouTube on Sahari THJ. We're also broadcasting on Facebook. You can look for my name, Shabnam Palesa Mohamed, on two pages, my personal page as well as my journalism page. Most importantly, your role is to help share this broadcast so people have access to information. We know the censorship is violating our human right to know and our rights to health, but that's where you come in. Share this broadcast across all your platforms, WhatsApp, Telegram, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever platforms you're on, make sure you share this broadcast. Of course, we'll also upload it afterwards, so you'll be able to share it widely, listen to what our panelists are talking about today, my colleagues and my friends. And our topic, of course, what are the legal implications of informed consent and compensation for harm caused by the jabs? Let's bring our guest into the studio. And let's welcome Advocate Sabelo Sibanda and Advocate Noleen Lee and Conell Loggenberg. Welcome to the People's Voice.
Thank you very much, Shabnam. How are you doing?
Fantastic. It's wonderful to have you with us, my colleagues and my friends. And as I said in our introduction earlier, the dream team. One of our members is not with us currently, and that's Advocate Kemi Behari. That's because he's on the ground distributing food. He'll try and join us during the course of the conversation. Country duty calls. And for us, country duty is this conversation that we're having right now, which has a massive impact on human rights, but also our understanding of what the law and what justice is. Of course, our panelists will mute their mics when they're not speaking, but to kick off the conversation, I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves so you'll understand why they were especially selected to join this critical conversation. And we'll begin with Advocate Sabelo Sibanda, who you are, what you do, and why you agreed to join this conversation. You have 60 seconds on the clock.
Thank you very much, Shabnam. My name is Sabelo Sibanda. I'm a practicing advocate here in South Africa. And I consider myself, more than anything else, a human rights lawyer, because the thrust of my work revolves around defending the rights of those whose rights are denied an opportunity to be heard and protected. And my participating in this platform is purely informed by the fact that it is important for everyone out there, South African and abroad, to understand the fact that they have a right to be informed and therefore have a right to consent or not to consent to anything that has to do with any procedure that involves their bodily integrity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate Sabelo Sibanda. We're going to ask you to mute there, and we're going to turn the mic to Advocate Noleen Lee in a second, just to recognize Dr. Ivan Jardine with the first comment today. Hi, looking forward to this meeting. I must tell my colleagues and friends that Dr. Ivan Jardine was arrested and released, was it this morning? Yesterday morning. The time is all a blur given how hard we're working, but he was arrested for being on his way to treat a very ill patient, being outside after 10 p.m. And because he was in a rush to treat his patient, he didn't have his permits with him. And so he was arrested. And there was no listening to, exceptional circumstances. This is a healthcare worker. He spent some time on the inside. He's free. Currently, he'll be in court Monday morning, but of course he has our full support, and certainly we need to exercise discretion, particularly in a time of what is called a pandemic. So thank you, Dr. Jardine, for joining us. Let's turn the mic over to Advocate Noleen Lee, who you are, what you do, and why you joined this conversation.
Good day, everyone. Thank you very much for this invitation. I really do appreciate it. I am an advocate. However, I stopped practicing as of the beginning of this year for personal reasons. One of them being that to me the truth is very important, and people will say that truth has many colors, and I strongly disagree. The truth is the truth, no matter which way you try and twist it, or turn it, or color it in. And for a long time, I've been observing, like many of us on this panel has, and people listening in, that something is very, very off. Something is terribly wrong and upside down. I concur with Advocate Sabelo in everything that he said. And the truth of the matter is that, first of all, we must recognize that we are human beings. Now, having said that, I know it looks and sounds silly to say that, but if the greater population out there who's starting to understand that we have been lied to all our lives, in the fact that we've been actually turned into lifeless, dead corporations to be controlled, and from that follows everything that we're going to talk to and about tonight. So my mission is to assist anyone and everyone that can make use of my legal knowledge, because I didn't leave my brain on the pub counter when I left the bar, as I always joke. So I think people need to stand up for what is truth and for themselves.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Noleen. Conell, who you are, what you do, and why you decided to join this conversation. 60 seconds on the clock.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. My name is Conell.
Perfect.
I'm your fellow South African living abroad, or your brother from another mother. As both Advocate Sabelo and Advocate Noleen has said about the need for restoration of what's going on at the moment, because a lot of things are actually sort of either blurred or they're way over people's head. I'm well aware of people actually looting, of some people looting the country at the moment, or stores for necessities. But my observation, given since the declaration by the World Health Organization of this pandemic, thing that people need more than anything these days is probably not food, but it's information. And I'll leave it at that.
That's perfect. People need information. There is certainly a hunger and a thirst for information because it affects rights so fundamentally. Ricky Erasmus, hi Shabnam, thanks for keeping South Africa informed. Thank you, Ricky. And evening from Marina. Yolandi says hello all, and Mr. Conell. Thank you, everyone. Remember to keep sharing this conversation. Guaranteed it's going to be censored and shadow banned. That's where you come in. Share it across all your platforms and keep reminding people to share it as well. All right, let's get straight into this conversation. The format is going to be, in the first half, we're going to explore informed consent. In the second half, we're going to look at compensation for the jab harms, the harms that are being called by the jabs, and we'll deliberately refer to it as that for now, for many reasons. One, because scientists say it's in theory not actually a V word, it's not defined as a V, it's something else, but also to try and avoid the censorship as much as we can. You are welcome to comment and ask questions of all of us. Of course, I join my colleagues in having a legal background. And of course, all of us are activists in various ways as well. Of course, the connection between the two is intrinsic and very, very important to understand and to become activists for human rights as well. So let's start here. Sabelo, in terms of the Constitution, what does the right to informed consent mean?
Thank you, Shabnam. The important aspect to appreciate in as far as the Constitution is concerned is that the aspect that speaks to informed consent actually speaks to the right to bodily and psychological integrity. So the whole rationale, the whole understanding, the whole aspect behind informed consent has to be given context in the sense that the primary position as regards informed consent is actually the freedom and security of the person. And in this particular instance, looking at bodily and psychological integrity. So the Constitution views the right to informed consent as a non-derogable right. It's a right that cannot be violated. It's a right that cannot be compromised. It's a right that basically belongs to each and everyone as an individual. It's one of those rights where constitutionally it is viewed from a perspective whereby it addresses itself as an individual right as much as it addresses itself as a group right, meaning that the entire nation has a right to informed consent. But within the context of the entire nation, it's each individual. It is not a right that can be negotiated away and be subjected to collective bargaining or collective understanding. For example, there is no leader who can get up, say, supposing it's a traditional authority. There is no traditional leader who can get up and saying, I'm consenting on behalf of the people under my charge. They have to consent for themselves as individuals. So the Constitution is very, very clear that where there is medical or scientific experimentation, there is no way that this can be done without the informed consent of the person upon whom the experimentation, be it medical or scientific, is taking place. And this, in actual fact, extends itself to a scenario where the National Health Act, particularly sections 6, 7, and 8, very, very clearly give a basis upon which the right is protected, and goes to the extent of ensuring that not only are we talking here about experimentation, but we are talking about any medical procedure whatsoever. And as we go on, it will become much clearer as to why this is so critical under the particular scenario that we find ourselves in, where there is this jab. And we'll need to then be able to speak to whether the jab is part of medical procedure or it's part of a scientific experiment, and then we'll be able to build it up from there. But otherwise, in a nutshell, every individual, and this is right around the world, by the way, the position as regards informed consent is not peculiar to South Africa. It's a right that is available to each and every of God's creation. As long as you're a human being, you have the right to informed consent. We will develop further what exactly the nuts and bolts of informed consent mean as we go along. Thank you, Shabnam.
Thank you, Sabelo, for that robust and insightful introduction into informed consent in relation to the Constitution, which we will also discuss whether it's going to protect us as we expect litigation in this area related to the jabs and informed consent. Noleen, informed consent, what would it mean in terms of this mass jabination program, because to me, informed consent means you have access to the entire patient information leaflet. You're aware of exactly what ingredients are in these jabs. You know what the potential adverse effects could be. All of them. You're aware that other databases in other countries, for example, the yellow card system in the UK has recorded over 1 million adverse effects and thousands of deaths. And you are told, so all of this information, you're also told that if you experience an adverse effect, you cannot sue the pharmaceutical company that manufactured that product. So for me, that's what informed consent in terms of these jabs mean. The person who is, first of all, from the education perspective, what's been pushed out. Secondly, from the person administering it to you, you need to know what the ingredients are. You need the whole patient information leaflet. You need to know all of the adverse effects that are being reported, and you need to know that you can't sue the manufacturer if something goes wrong. What are your thoughts on that? What does informed consent then mean in terms of these jabs? Would you agree? And what kind of information should be given and is not being given to our people?
Well, I always prefer to use analogies and examples, and because I've found that a lot of people think in pictures, and as lawyers we are very good with words and stringing words together, and Advocate Sabelo put it absolutely so eloquently. My take on this is, for instance, let's use an example. If one says that you have the right to breathe, you are born with the right to breathe. Otherwise, you would not be able to live if you cannot breathe. If you die when you're born because you can't breathe, or late in your life, it's because you cannot breathe. So the question and the situation is that you have an intrinsic right to breathe. That's in order to live. Now that can be pulled right across the spectrum of unalienable rights, including the right to informed consent. Just as by way, before I get into your question, by way of another example, if you have any sort of life-threatening allergy, like a nut allergy, or if you eat nuts, you can suffer anaphylactic shock. Now, what is the position if you, knowing that you have an allergy, for instance, which is maybe peculiar to you and other people, and someone comes along, and because this person somehow believes, or an entity believes, that for whatever bizarre reason, everybody needs the proteins contained in peanuts, they can force you to eat peanuts. And you, knowing your situation, your medical condition, if you touch a peanut, that you could suffer anaphylactic shock and die, on whom is the duty to actually protect yourself? So it lies on yourself. And informed consent, everything you mentioned, you need to be able to be put into a position to make a decision, because it is your body. It is your life. It's not the person trying to impose their rights or rules or regulations upon you. It's about you. So you need to understand, and you have the absolute right to ask all this information. And when it comes to something which doesn't sit right, for instance, that there is this clause, or we usually in contracts we talk about the fine script, someone wants you to enter into a contract with them, and it's this contract and very fine print at the end, and they just jibber jabber over it, and you want to sign it, and once you've signed it, you realize you've actually signed away everything. The same thing with this. As soon as something is introduced, a term or condition such as that you cannot sue this person. Now let's go back to the example of eating a peanut. You cannot touch peanuts. But someone comes along and says, you know, oh, eat this peanut or take this packet, it's actually going to be good for you. And this type of peanut cannot actually harm you or whatever. But should it harm you, then you can't sue us. So what I'm trying to put out to the people here in layman's terms is use your common sense. If 1 and 1 doesn't make 2, if it doesn't equal 2, then something is very off. And you need to stop and you need to think very carefully. Not everybody is educated at the same level, but we all have what we call common sense. And I do believe that despite and irrespective of any pressure put upon you, you have to train yourself to stand back, especially in situations like this in which we find ourselves. Stop, think, calculate, and then act. Fear
Thank you,
is
Noleen.
something. Yeah.
Thank you, Noleen. Do you want to just finish that last sentence about fear, because it's probably an important one?
Well, fear, as we all know, is false evidence appearing real.
Mm-hmm. False evidence appearing real. And it's used as a weapon against our people.
As a weapon.
And we'll get into that as well, because certainly there are implications for what informed consent means if your consent is premised in fear, right? Let's take a comment before we turn the mic over to Conell on the topic of education. Barbie, Noleen, I'm going to ask you to lift your camera a bit so we can see you speaking, if you can, while I read this comment. Barbie Fotheringham, absolutely no one has been given any information or knowledge about this poisonous experimental bee in South Africa. All people are expected to do is produce an ID. No one signs anything. They're not told anything, just jabbed and leave. They don't even spend time to see if an adverse reaction happens or appears. People are totally ignorant. They're just told that they have to get a bee. So there's the evidence right there of what's going on in our country. And of course, there are hundreds and thousands of reports of these kind of incidents happening. Conell, you've been doing a couple of very informative videos on this topic of informed consent. What is your understanding of the level of awareness, education, common sense that people have? Do they know? And of course, there's a distinction between those who have the data to access our videos and our work and those that don't. But what is your understanding, you know, looking at South Africa and looking at the UK, of people's understanding that this is an experimental product, that it's in trial until at least 2023, that there are no medium to long-term safety records, and that their own countries, meaning you yourself, will have to compensate you yourself as a victim if something goes wrong? What is your understanding of the level of awareness that there is, Conell?
Thank you for that question, Shabnam. I'll add to the positions that Advocate Sabelo and Noleen had made. First of all, that element of informed consent, given the statement informed consent, it means the opposite of that is uninformed consent. And there's a reason why informed consent is such an important aspect, because it goes to the heart of agreement, which Noleen has spoken about. So what you have at the moment is an offer being made and some form of suggested or manufactured acceptance. And that's regarded as an agreement. Now, in contract law, an offer doesn't constitute a contract. That's just an offer. So what the government's doing at the moment, or the manufacturers of these injections doing via the government and proxy of all organizations such as the Department of Basic Education, your employers, they're now telling you to encourage you to have this injection. We know that form of encouragement actually goes down to the root of a form of coercion. They're now telling you that this is mandatory. Well, again, and I think it's very important for people to note on those 2 points that both Sabelo and Noleen made, your involvement is critical in this. This is your body. And as far as that information is concerned, it is sadly the case, Shabnam, that not many people are aware that of their inviolable human right. It doesn't matter what anybody has put on a piece of paper, typed up, written in stone, whatever. As far as this is concerned, this is your body. And it is useful to know that there is information out there for the optimum operation of your own body, that is to preserve and enhance your bodily integrity. Now there is also information for the optimal operation of your psychological integrity. And that goes as far as having information, relevant information, so as to make better substantive decisions. Now, that's not to say that the decisions people are making isn't good. However, it is precisely that people lack relevant information to make a decision that is rational for the purposes that they're making that decision. Now, what is a rational decision is one where you have all the sufficient information, such as Noleen had beautifully illustrated. What is it that you are being given? What are you offering me? If I said to you, Shabnam, here is a nice vehicle, hasn't got a badge on it, and everything is all covered, it's nice and shiny, and you'd probably want to know, Conell, does that come with the keys? And has it got an engine in it? And what does it drive
have airbags?
All of that.
Right?
All of that, yes. So all of these things you'd probably want to know. But what we find right now is that the governments, they do inform the people, but they put this stuff on a website and in little leaflets and all of that. One of the things Advocate Sabelo picked up on is that this information doesn't necessarily come in a language that everybody understands. English is not my first language. I find all this stuff in English. So I'm having to look at this information, translate it into Afrikaans, make it make sense in my head, and then share with a friend. And they have read the same thing and they've read something completely different. I'm thinking, wow, this is what it means in English. So one example in terms of the decisions people make, which goes to the point of informed consent, is, as you said, people are being invited to come in and take an injection and say, this is good for you. But the element of that this is part of a research program, that this is research, and also that this is not a product to the description that they give, the V, as I'm on your platform at the moment, I know you prefer to use that it is not a V. That information isn't given to people up front. Now, that is extremely important. I cannot be telling you, Shabnam, here is a vehicle I'm offering you, but you have no idea that that is a card box with a lot of pin cushions. The moment you get to sit on that seat, it's going to prick you in places you don't want to be talking about here. Okay? So it's important that you have full information. That is the Section 6 of the South African National Health Act. And then it needs your consent again. That's the agreement part. And when it comes to these things, affecting your health or your healthcare, you cannot be excluded. You must be included.
Absolutely.
I hope that answers partly some of your question that you've asked so far.
Look, it does indeed. And inclusion is such an important point. And the point you raised with reference to Advocate Sibanda about language, certainly anyone who was explained about these jabs in a language that is not their first language did not provide informed consent. That is not informed consent. That is a violation of the basic fundamental rights of a human being to have access to all information in a language they understand, to be able to make a decision.
It seems
Sabelo,
like
I
a
want to
slice of
turn
pizza sorts that out for you.
a slice of
pizza and
to have a
seems to-
burger,
Yeah.
right? People are hungry. Let's give you a t-shirt. Let's take a couple of comments before we come back to Sabelo here. Shirley Miles said, I agree with Barbie. There's no information given of why and what you're registering for. There are no package inserts explaining what is in the jab. Marina Muehlberg-Smith, people I know have taken it blindly to get their lives back to normal. Shamefully, they've been duped. Crossing fingers, they've got no bad outcomes from their uninformed choices. Absolutely. Now they're talking about booster shots and variant escapes, etc. Jacqueline DuPont, I have witnessed teachers lining up for the V, but they've got no clue what they're receiving. As a teacher, I've been ostracized for questioning the data and bringing awareness to the uninformed. Medical apartheid right there, massive polarization happening. Marina Muehlberg-Smith, it's an experimental treatment with the results or outcomes not being taken into account. And another one here from Dr. Evie Rapiti. Patients have an inherent right to refuse any treatment that is being offered to them by a healthcare provider, regardless of whether the patient needs the treatment or not. Patients have the right to refuse treatment on religious grounds or for personal reasons. An example of patients who are members of Jehovah's Witness do not accept blood transfusions. Doctors are compelled to respect the patient's rights. There was a case of a Jehovah's Witness patient who was transfused without his knowledge. And I think, Dr. Rapiti, you're going to have to put the second part of that comment somewhere. I think it's just stopped there, so I can't read the rest of it. And a comment from Lenny Govender, very informative, great discussion. Love the content that's coming out. Thank you, Lenny. You can see why we've got this team together here. So Sabelo, I mean, this conversation is getting deep now into the issues that we are facing. As a nation, on the brink of economic disaster, and that will draw into this compensation scheme a little later on. But what people like us are learning, and lawyers who are standing up for the human rights of people understand, because we're constantly looking at the research coming out, is that there are scientists who are saying that the spike protein is dangerous, that it is harming people. And of course, none of that is visible in mainstream spaces, whether that's pharmaceutical companies refusing to admit it, whether it's mainstream media platforms that refuse to talk about it, whether they are paid lobbyists working in various NGOs whose sole purpose is to make sure that we believe the only way through this pandemic is the jabs. What kind of accountability will there be for these people, from government to healthcare workers and scientists, to pharmaceutical companies, and to the media, who are censoring the very real dangers that are involved? Do they just escape liability, or can they be held accountable because there was a reasonable apprehension of harm?
Look, the scenario as it stands is that from how they would love to have the whole thing play itself out, they do not intend to be accountable to anyone. They have no intention whatsoever to make right for the harm that they are doing. And you see, we are caught in an interesting situation, Shabnam, whereby the harm that is being perpetrated against innocent people is not of itself out of ignorance, in the sense that the harm that is being perpetrated is actually orchestrated, in the sense that from the very beginning, of this whole escapade, governments took it upon themselves to say they are the only official authority that will speak on this disease. And the only doctors, the only scientists, the only media houses that have been given an access to being heard by the world are those that follow the dominant narrative. For as long as you say something contrary, you are ostracized. So necessarily, what that means and what therefore this talks to is that within the general legal prescripts, we are looking at a clear case of people who are conspiring to commit a crime and are actually in the process of committing crimes against humanity. And there are those who occupy a particular position as the brains behind the entire exercise. And then there are those who basically fit into the equation according to their own different areas of involvement, and therefore become complicit in the orchestration of the entire exercise. You find, for instance, there are doctors who are clearly in the know as to what is happening. There are government officials who are actually hired for purposes of ensuring that they structure a particular message which is designed to resonate with the people. So you find that we have a clear case of fraud through misrepresentation. There is a misrepresentation of facts, there is misinformation, and there is a deliberate withholding of information that would otherwise enable people to be adequately informed and therefore be able to make their informed consent as per the constitutional prescripts. It is very disheartening to hear that people go for the jab and they're not even told anything. They are simply being put into a position where there is a play on the natural fears of a human being. And after they've been made so scared, they run for this thing in the belief that this is the way out, whereas in actual fact, it is not. So all these people who have come into the fray and used their God-given talents in a manner that is actually destructive of God's creation will be held liable. Whether it will be in the same lines as the Nuremberg trials that were held after World War II, after the Germans had done exactly what is being done now, or it will take a different format altogether is another thing. The most important thing is that the laws are there to ensure that these people are brought to book. And the beautiful thing when it comes to South Africa particularly is that there is the localization of the Rome Statute through legislation. So we do have the provision whereby we can go through the ICC procedures without having to take anyone to The Hague. We actually do it here. So definitely, it is important for those who are part of this scheme, whether directly or indirectly, to realize that they will be held accountable sooner than later. And the reason why it's sooner than later is because more and more people are waking up to their rights. This is not about people being rebellious. This is not about people deciding that they have developed some revolutionary spirit or anything like that. It's simply about people saying, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that the Constitution actually affords me the right to be informed about this whole thing, and also based on that particular constitutional provision, the law goes on further to give me the right to say no, I do not consent. And when I say no, I do not consent, that does not in any manner whatsoever mean I am disagreeable. It simply means I am taking my constitutional right, which in itself is a confirmation of my God-given right to be able to determine my own bodily integrity, to be able to determine that which I desire to have injected into me or not injected into me. So in a nutshell, Shabnam, even for those who are thinking that they will be able one day to simply say, oh, but I was just at the low end of the equation. My boss told me to do it. No, you are liable as an individual for ensuring that that which was deemed illegal was actually executed because of your involvement in the whole execution plan. Without
Absolutely.
your involvement, it would probably have not gotten to the level that it is now. Maybe your involvement is responsible for one death, two deaths, 1,000 deaths. It really doesn't matter anymore. There comes a point where, by virtue of the fact that you also participated, you are therefore liable together with whoever initiated the process in the first place.
Absolutely, absolutely. Advocate Sabelo Sibanda, they're talking about accountability and the apprehension of harm and the human rights implications. And of course, those of us on this panel and many of you listening and watching right now may be aware that we do have an independent voluntary public interest platform called Savers, www.savers, to report as a victim, family member or friend, or a healthcare worker, the harm, the adverse effects, the injuries, or death that are being caused or related to these jabs. And of course, the complaints, reports, and cases that we're getting are very painful, very, very painful, both physical damage and cognitive damage that nobody needed to go through. And one of the most painful comments we get is, I didn't know. If I knew, I never would have done this. So we certainly encourage victims, families, friends, and healthcare workers to report www.savers.co.za. So we have a record, we have the data, so people can have access to transparency, accountability, and real help. I want to take a couple of comments before we place Advocate, Noleen, into a scenario situation. I'm going to ask her a scenario type question. Let's take a couple of comments here. Abdul Yunus says, why don't healthcare professionals seeing the ethical implications of the use of the V while Big Pharma are not accountable? The adverse effects are being downplayed. Tesna Aston, hello comrade. Hey Shabnam, too many people talking in family groups, etc. What is actually happening to their family members and friends about the jab and the harm that it's causing people? Abdul Yunus, and now the harms are forced on innocent citizens by government. Of course, we know that our public health authority, SAPRA, and others are funded by the Gates Foundation and pharmaceutical companies. Of course, massive conflicts of interest. In essence, this is a capture of a government, and it's the people being held at ransom. From Mirik SA, my informed My individual right to informed consent, South Africa. Greetings from Cape Town. Thank you for providing this crucial topic. Thank you for that, Teresa Schroeder. We'll talk about Merrick as well. And a couple of comments from doctors we're going to get into. Tesna asked, and the problem is that it sounds far-fetched. So when we try to educate, we're ignored as anti-vaxxers. It's the famous terminology of dealing with legitimate concerns. Marina Muehlberg-Smith, Sage in the UK have used aggressive psychology to purposefully elicit massive fear and drive people into the VQs. Many governments have done the same. It's appalling. Estelle Mansfield, thank you, Advocate Sibanda. I will not allow myself to be railroaded under any circumstances. Marina Muehlberg-Smith, is the data made publicly available and published anywhere from the SAVARS system or website? The data is publicly available on the SAVARS website. You can download a PDF which released to the public periodically together with a poster summarizing some of the cases contained within that batch of data. And of course, the data is also reviewed by ethical medical professionals. And there are many of those who are speaking out and standing up for what they're seeing happen to not just patients. They see them as more than patients, but as human beings. Phoebe Pup, one of the most disheartening things for me is that there's no reporting in South African media about any of the widely reported side effects. This we know for a fact. 2 of the cases that did make it to media when the people had passed away, in both instances, the authorities completely denied that it had anything to do with the jabs. And we'll get into those particular 2 cases when we talk about compensation. Let's take 2 comments from our doctors before we move over to Noleen. Dr. Evie Rapiti, healthcare providers must abide by 3 conditions. There should be no deceit or withholding of information, number 1. Number 2, the providers of a service have to be competent to administer the drug. They must be fully aware of all aspects of the treatment or drug. This information must be imparted to patients in a language that they understand. And number 3, if after all the information is given, patients still have a right to refuse, this right must be respected without any coercion, force, or threats. And I'll add in brackets manipulation and bribes and harassment. I mean, that's happening on a daily level. People are being harassed into taking these products. Second comment from Dr. Evie Rapiti, the EU and Norway have rejected the AstraZeneca jab because of its adverse clotting defects. These jabs are going to be given to the WHO to use it on citizens in poorer countries. Would the panel comment on this decision by the WHO to use dangerous or rejected drugs on the poor citizens of the world? Surely this is highly unethical. And we'll take that question from Dr. Rapiti. Panelists, just bear that one in mind. And then we've got Dr. Shankara Chetty. You were sold a product with the promise of protection, and it's non-refundable and could get costlier with time. When you find it doesn't work, you're told that it'll only work when everyone buys it. I mean, just the lack of logic and common sense in that. Thank you, Dr. Shankara Chetty. He also says, now what to do? Realize you were duped or convince everyone to buy it to save your investment. Isn't that what it's really about? So let's respond to Dr. Rapiti's question before the scenario that I want to present to Noleen. Here's the question again. And he's talking about these AstraZeneca jabs, clotting, going to be given to the WHO to use on citizens in poor countries. What is our comment on this? Surely it's highly unethical. But this wouldn't be the first time something like this has happened, where dangerous drugs have been dumped on low to middle income countries because they need to A, protect their profit bottom line, and B, just experiment and see what happens to these people. I mean, who cares? Who would like to comment on that? Panelists?
No, Dr. Rapiti is very right that this particular position is highly unethical. Not only is it unethical, it is illegal and wrong. But then now, you see, if it was a scenario whereby it's just the World Health Organization taking that decision, and the countries which are supposed to receive these faulty jabs were to stand up and say, no, we're not interested, we're not taking them. That would be another thing. But we have a scenario here whereby these people know exactly what they are doing in receiving these faulty jabs. And not only is it a question of receiving as such, because receiving implies giver and the recipient, and the recipient basically receiving a gift. But in this particular instance, as you very correctly put it, Shabnam, that to protect their profits, they then pass them on to the so-called poorer countries. And we buy. This is where our misleaders basically ensure that they offer us up as sacrificial lambs, because they are actually literally in a scenario where you go to the market, you see in the market your fresh veg, and at the same time, there is all the rotten veg that is being thrown away because it is not fit for human consumption. And you actually go and buy that veg that you know is unfit for human consumption and leave that which is good. So unethical as it is for the World Health Organization to take this position, the scenario that we now have to deal with and therefore take our misleaders to book and account is how it is that they can actually take our taxpayers' money and go and buy poisons which are aimed at poisoning us, the people, which are aimed at basically boosting someone's profit margins and therefore increasing their net worth, whilst killing the same people who are paying for these things. Because the mistake that a lot of people make, Shabnam, is to take this position and belief that government is using government's money to buy these things. No, government is using our money as the taxpayers, and we are complicit in the murder of innocent people by allowing our taxpayers' money to be used in a manner that is actually going to kill innocent people. So there comes a point where we have to get these people to account, where these people have to be transparent and realize that we are the ones who are actually empowering them over ourselves. So we have a
Absolutely solid point there.
responsibility to stand against what the World Health Organization is doing, but our greater responsibility is to stand against the complicit manner in which our misleaders are actually supporting the World Health Organization. We will not be a
Absolutely.
dumping ground for these shoddy products.
Absolutely. And I think Advocate Sabelo Sibanda has covered that point adequately, and there's so much more for us to talk about. And comments as well. Desna Aston, the problem is we're expecting unethical and immoral people to become ethical and moral. And we have to understand it's simply not going to happen. Profits before people. It always is. And yes, taxpayer money and the resources of this country belong to the people of this country. We must decide what happens with our resources. Government, in other words, the managing agents for the predatory elite, do not have that right. And I want to talk about employment matters in a second. CBPAP, one of the most disheartening things for me is that there's no reporting in South African media about any of the widely reported side effects. Well, CBPAP, that's because many of these media platforms are also funded by pharmaceutical industry through its various agents and mechanisms of operation. Couple more comments here, and there's a lot, and I'm so glad people are so actively involved and engaged. Please remember, keep sharing this conversation. Kashifa Pandey, what about the aggressive adverts during regular broadcasting? It plays a huge role in coercion. Absolutely does. If all you keep hearing is jab, 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 that's literally what's happening. That, unless you have access to alternate information, is going to force you into thinking you've given consent when you actually haven't. In fact, it's a very effective Nazi propaganda tool. You keep repeating something until people start to believe that it's true. Exactly what it is.
Well, sorry, Shabnam, just to jump in there. In actual fact, Mr. Ramaphosa said it at the beginning of the year. We are going to repeat this message until it sinks in the subconscious mind of the people. Those were his words.
How much more clearer? In plain sight, they tell you what it is they're going to do to you. Right? That's what they do. Rueda Halim, if it's illegal, why are authorities not rejecting it? Well, because people are getting paid, Rueda, and there's commissions involved for the number of jabs that, the uptake and punishment if not. Cheryl Watson, because of the poor turnout, the department have held this calling on religious leaders to encourage their people to go for the jabs. What is your take on this? Well, quickly, the religious leaders are just as accountable as anybody else. If they are coercing their flock who trust in them to take an experimental jab, absolutely accountable as well. Sadly, Shirley Miles, sadly, it's not just the ruling party, but governments as a whole who are pushing this narrative in South Africa. Follow the money. Absolutely, Shirley. We've got to be honest about that. Trust issue. Dr. Shankara Chetty, is the president taking this experimental jab on national television a form of coercion? Well, that's if we believe that he actually took the real jab. And yes, it is. I mean, it's one of the greatest tools being used in different countries to show political leaders apparently taking these jabs. And yes, it is a form of coercion and propaganda. Noleen, the scenario that I want to draw you into is based on the following. COVID-19 is a form of coronavirus. It has over a 98% recovery rate. We know that preventions and treatments, highly effective, safe, effective, and cheap, exist. We know this for a fact. And yet, in all of the material being pushed out by government through the agencies it's hired to do specifically this in very well coordinated ways, you never see the word voluntary. So what does that mean? People think it's mandatory. Unions, for example, have complained bitterly that they are being intimidated and threatened into not reporting the adverse effects that they are actually experiencing. So my question for you is, if we were arguing in front of the Constitutional Court based on that set of facts, we're not told that it's voluntary. We're not told that 98% recovery rate. We're not told alternative preventions and treatments exist. Plus, individuals, groups, and organizations like unions are being threatened when they try to report adverse effects, and that includes DENOSA. If we were arguing in Constitutional Court, how would we argue for a halt to the rollout of these experimental gene therapy products?
Well, there are many, all of us have got our own angles of argument. My angle would, for instance, be, and I just have to link up to what Advocate Sabelo has said and Conell has said, talking about an offer and an acceptance. In the absence of a proper informed acceptance, there cannot be any agreement or any contract. Now, you can contract out of anything except fraud. Now, in the absence of informed consent, the parties inducing you to do something that you do not actually realize the extent of, the consequences of, are committing fraud. And Globally, this is common cause. This is a rule, I believe, everywhere. Fraud vitiates everything. So, to answer your question, my argument would be that these are the facts, and we were not informed. We were deceived, whatever the argument may be on the parties. It's, for instance, like saying we had a sore on our arm. We hurt our arm in the factory, and then we were summarily told we had to go to hospital and have our arm amputated. We did not know that we could put some ointment on it or stitches or anything. Now we're standing in front of the court with our arm chopped off. Sorry for the talking so in such terms, but it is what it is, because the adverse effects are far worse than that. It's actually death, and dead men can't talk. So to come back before the Constitutional Court, for instance, would be, this is the scenario. Now tell the other party to refute that. In other words, they must show that they actually gave you all the information necessary for you to have made that decision. They must show that they did not induce fear. They must show that they did not induce harassment. And I can tell you for a fact right now that in a great, wonderful world, and a justice system where the system actually works, that argument or that defense would fall flat on its face. The reality, however, and this I'm saying in caution, is that things are not what they seem to be. And as Advocate Sabelo has alluded to, people are being bought, people are being bribed, they're being blackmailed to do things which ordinarily they would not do. This includes the judiciary, this includes Big Pharma, this includes doctors. If they go after your children, your family, what are you going to do? So it's not just purely a question of saying, oh my goodness, look how bad they are and all that kind of thing. It's got far wider implications, and this is where the psychological warfare comes in. And unfortunately, there is only one or two paths that one can take. It's the light or the dark. Because in between, what we call the gray area, is the area where once you go there, there's no return. So yes, it's in a nutshell, not having exact facts, but that is how I would argue. And if you could argue fraud, if you can argue the fact that you were not properly informed, and by the way, just to interject, for anyone who's being labeled as mad or conspiracy or whatever, make a change in your brain waves right now. That means you're over target. You've hit a nerve, because truth hurts, and truth will always elicit a reaction from someone who stands in the dark and who tries and tells you something is what it actually is not. So
Absolutely.
we have to start with a mental boot camp up here. We have to sit back, look at this, and this goes for everyone. This doesn't it relates to from the poorest to the richest. It's got nothing to do with intelligence. It's got to do with what you see and what you think and what look around you. So I know that may not answer your question as beautifully as it ought. There are many scenarios, but in a nutshell, You cannot, if you are harassed in any way or form, be brave enough and speak up, because I can tell you now, although this is a very, it's dangerous times, it is dangerous times, but speak up. Because if
That's the most important thing,
not
Noleen. That
everybody
is the
can,
most.
not everybody can or will, but at least if there are enough people who start to speak up, at least the world will listen. And then I just want to add one thing. I saw an earlier comment, which I also agree with the fact that, it comes down to the fact that people believe everything, and, we believe people are good and they're actually here to help us. And this is how we were raised, that kind of thing. People must wake up and realize that it is not what it is. What is at play here, as I said before in a previous meeting, it's got nothing to do with logic. It's got nothing to do with interest in your health. It is called an agenda. And there's one agenda. So you cannot think for 1 minute that by being nice or being, and I don't say you have to be aggressive, but what I'm trying to say is, this is an agenda. It has been put in motion worldwide. People have been bought off and have basically traded their souls for something they anyway have to leave behind when they leave this earth themselves. But be that as it may, it's an agenda. So people have to wake up that there is a plan. There is ample evidence of that plan having been hatched over many, many, many years from many, many, many sources. And I would suggest that those who are able to do their research, and that will lead you to understand better, because we can talk until the cows grow horns or the donkeys grow horns, until every person out there has done their own research or have spoken to enough people to make the penny drop. You can read something, you can hear something 300 million times until that penny drops, until you understand, as hard and as difficult and heartbreaking as it may be, that your life is being put on the altar as sacrifice for other people to enrich themselves. You are not going to be able to make an informed decision. Therefore, stand up for your rights. And if you are in a situation that you're not comfortable with, you are well within your rights to say, I'm not going to make a decision now. Give me time to go think about it. And then you go phone a friend, or you do whatever you need to do.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that very powerful contribution there, Noleen. Very powerful indeed. And of course, our advice to people, and we've put out posters about this, is if you're being threatened, go and open a criminal case for intimidation or harassment, fraud, if that's what's happened to you. And if STAPS doesn't help you, go to IPID, open up a civil case for pain and suffering and damages, and make it public. Because there are people who are willing to support you who are going through exactly the same thing. Cheryl Watson, the Department of Health not guilty of false advertising when they declare the jab as safe? Simple answer, yes. And we'll take a couple of comments in a bit. But I want to turn the mic over to Conell, because I know you've got some comments on some ground that we've covered previously. And I want to contextualize that by saying the following, that the pharmaceutical industry has a history of fraud, corruption, racketeering, and harm. Bring it back home, Johnson & Johnson, for example, cancer-causing baby powder, asbestos in the baby powder. Johnson & Johnson, also known as Janssen, let's not get it confused. They changed names to confuse us. Johnson & Johnson had to pay damages for that. Pfizer has been caught out for exactly the same criminal conduct, has paid billions in compensation. Also, for falsifying scientific studies and bribing doctors and scientists. And in case we forgot, Pfizer told Brazil, Argentina, and South Africa, if you want our jabs, guess what? You're going to have to give us your military bases, your embassies, your reserve banks, billions or trillions in cash in foreign accounts, and of course, blanket immunity. Whether we deliver or not, whether our products harm you or not, we want that immunity. Now, Zweli Mkhize, the erstwhile Minister of Health, said that Pfizer backed down. There's no proof of that, because all of those agreements are sealed in fraudulent non-disclosure agreements. We don't know right now who our assets, including our military, who was slow to defend us in this chaos we're currently in, we don't know who our military belong to. So I want to, on that point, very important point to absorb, turn the mic over to Conell for any comments you have on what we've covered thus far, Conell. But the question I specifically wanted to ask you relates to disinformation and censorship in social media. It's massive. Anytime anyone has a comment about their own experience, you're an anti-vaxxer, you're going to kill us all, you're a conspiracy theorist. They don't even want people to speak about their experiences. They call that being anti-vax. So Conell, you can comment on whatever you need to, but I really want you to talk about, because you're quite active on social media as well, about the disinformation and censorship being perpetuated by pharma lobbyists in there being paid, plus the tech giants themselves. Conell.
Yeah, thank you. Very good question, actually, Shabnam. The term anti-vaxxer or conspiracy theorist, whenever a comment relates or seems to denote a personal attack, remember this one thing. It doesn't address the facts. It addresses an emotive issue. So those are usually the comments I do not respond to, because it doesn't address the point. Doesn't address. You can call me tall, short, crooked, whatever. But that has got nothing to do with the point that I made. So if I said that oranges are orange and apples are red, and you come and tell me, oh, I'm a conspiracy theorist, that does not address the point of apples and oranges. So it similar to the point that people make, that, let's say, the following is a fact. Many people, subsequent to having had any of these injections, had reported suffering severe adverse effects, and many other people had reported their members of families having died subsequent to having had some of these injections. Now, is that a fact or not? That is a fact. But now, at the bottom of my little page, I'm going to get a little box from Facebook, unsolicited, for information about COVID-19, visit the following. I did not invite that, but it seems to suggest that what I had said isn't true. And then obviously you have other people commenting, making personal comments again. Now, about representation. Representation is a serious matter, because if you say something, and particularly if you're selling something, you're making something on offer to the public, and it's in the public interest, it affects the public's health, it better be represented correctly. The opposite of that is misrepresentation, and misrepresentation is not supported in law for you to be absolved of any obligation. If you misrepresent, you've got to answer. So that misrepresentation also goes to the heart of medical practitioners, or any healthcare worker for that matter, because it addresses your conduct. Your conduct precisely emanates from your regulator, who has a legal right to regulate you, and they regulate you on the back of legal obligations, which they themselves are under, and now expect you lawfully to conduct yourself in line with those things. It means that anything you do is in representation of the health service, so you can be held accountable. Now, as Dr. Rapiti rightly said, that that there is a whole string of code of conduct. You can only look at the Health Professions Council of South Africa, you'll see that there, or you can go to, and as far as nurses who are expected perhaps to give these jobs, the South African Nursing Council, they have a whole code of conduct for them. And one, in a nutshell, some of those codes, it goes as far as to, you cannot give a patient or treat the patient or get involved with the patient without them being informed, telling them exactly what you're doing for them. Let's say you just want to put a bit of lotion on them. You need to get their permission. You need to inform them. And then you need to get their permission. You cannot simply say, I've got an injection here. The doctor has prescribed it for you. Well, which doctor? Has the doctor seen the patient? Has the doctor explained to the patient what it's for? Has the patient agreed to this? That's how far it goes. So, because you see, what I find myself at the moment, I have many people who being referred to the regulator, and I happen to represent their cases at this regulatory hearings, and having to go up against barristers, or is the advocate equivalent here, and having to defend them for alleged misconduct. Now, one of those misconducts can be in the form of misrepresentation. You told the patient that this is safe, but the person's dead now, or the person suffers side effects. You said it's safe. They say, yeah, but I got told that it's safe. No. You take individual accountability, responsibility, because according to your code of conduct, you ought to know what you are doing. To say that I didn't know is no defense. It's no defense, because you ought to know. Every little drug that you administer, say for instance here in the UK, it's called the BNF, it's a British National Formulary. You're going to go through that book and make sure that you know what you're about to give, because you are new. You need to stand ready to deal with any potential side effects. Now, it is no secret, well, perhaps to people who are uninformed, whether unintentionally or not, that these products do have serious side effects, and they issue this information in a little leaflet. Now, someone mentioned there that not all of that information is given readily to the public. Yes, that's true. And it is sad to see what's going on as you see some side effects being reported by people. Let's take, for example, the evidence given by some members in the public that they now got metal pieces sticking to them. I mean, that is abnormal, okay? It is abnormal. And it is not listed on the information leaflet that there are metallic products in this jab. Now, anybody offering or suggesting and promoting to you to take this product, and they say that is safe, when they say safe, you should ask them, when you say safe, in which way? How is it safe? The reason why many of the questions amongst those questions are, am I at risk of dying from this product? If the answer is no, then what about the manufacturer's own statement that says that a small number of people had suffered severe side effects and that a small number of people had died? Well, what is a small number? I always put this to people. 1,000 people or one person? One person is a small number. When you go for your jab, you are that small number, and one person, a small number, is at risk of potential death. Now, about other people who've had this jab and they say, well, nothing's happened to me. Well, how do you know what they've had? In a trial, you would ordinarily give some people the real thing, other people perhaps half of it, and a lot of people you'll give the placebo. Now, these are blind trials, and every product has got a badge number, and it's only the manufacturer who knows which are the placebos and which are the real thing, right? About the VARs that you see, we have a yellow card system here. The government happily reports on this on a weekly basis. The government reports on what the public had put in there. It is not compulsory for anybody to complete that, or for the healthcare providers who had injected the product, or for the manufacturers to report any adverse events. So the people who happen to report this is people who happen to know that they can report this, who know how to use this, who happen to have access to this database in order to input it. So the level of information that we're getting at the moment is highly likely just the tip of the iceberg. So it is crucial to understand that the information that's being given to people is far less than half of it. And one needs to ask those critical questions, as Noleen has pointed out, rather as to just accept what's being told to you. On that point of being told, just accepting what you're being told. Now, authority is a powerful thing. It's a very, very powerful thing. There's mandate and then there's law. There's a suggestion that the jabs are mandatory. Well, what is a mandate? A mandate is when you're giving somebody authority to do something. Okay? Like you've elected somebody as the leader of your party, so you now give them mandate to do the following things. What is law? Law, the purpose of the law is to regulate or to balance your and my rights and responsibilities. Now, just look at the piece of law in relation to what we're talking about here. Chapter 2, Section 12, subsection B of the South African Constitution. You have the right to make decisions about your body. Now, nobody is mandated to take over that right. It says you have the right to make decisions about your own body. Now, you can mandate somebody, you say, the jab is now mandatory. Yeah, mandatory for who? Mandatory for everybody. So if it's mandatory for me, it means I have now got the power to make a decision about it. That's how you should understand that. So if the mandate is to you, you are mandated to take the jab. It is your decision because it doesn't override the law. You've got bodily and psychological integrity. So it is vital, absolutely vital for people to understand information in proper context, as opposed to what you mentioned, Shabnam, the lobbying firms which will come out there and push one narrative. Be absolutely vigilant about how the same story can be spun to you to look completely different and say, oh, it's now the law. Now, if you had to take this jab and you happen to have succumbed, you lost your life, well, it'd be a bit too late to get this message in then. But anybody who did and they lost their lives, well, look at the compensatory element. And I don't want to jump the gun towards the compensation. What do you get compensated with? Money. What you could do with that? What could you do with me? You can only purchase things. Can you please tell me any amount of money that would enhance the quality of your life if you're dead?
Absolutely. That's a point that keeps coming up. It's the profound question. Can any amount of money compensate you when you're dead? It can't. Thank you, Conell, for that very powerful contribution. And I just want to comment on the one aspect of it, which is that our people are not being screened before taking these jabs. So whether you have pre-existing clotting conditions is not taken into consideration. Whether you have natural immunity from a previous infection is not taken into consideration. Have you taken the flu vaccine within a couple of months of taking this injection? Not taken into consideration. Ultimately putting people at massive and unnecessary risks. And we'll take a couple of comments before we move into employment and then the compensation scheme. Let's look at a couple of comments here. Dr. Evie Rapiti, when a trial drug results in as many deaths as this jab, the ethical thing to do is to stop the trial. This was done with the drug thalidomide. This jab should be stopped immediately on scientific grounds. Further, the current jabs will not provide protection against the current deadly Delta strain. So I fail to see the reason to still continue with this program. We need to treat the disease in its acute form. Our government leaders and their advisors have lost the plot. Thank you, Dr. Rapiti, for telling it like it is. And we're going to get into employment in a bit. Dr. Rapiti also calls out the media guilty of spreading misinformation and downplaying the adverse events of the jabs. They should feel ashamed of themselves. Vicky Erasmus, I'm extremely concerned that people blindly accept what WHO, Fauci, Gates, or DOH say when we know they make billions and then they attack the thousands of concerned experts and friends warning them. I mean, since when does our Department of Health have a good track record? Esidimeni, anyone? Does anyone remember what the healthcare system looks like in this country for you to blindly believe whatever the Department of Health or this government tells you? Have we learned nothing? Dr. Rapiti, it's time that doctors learned about the jab and stopped being led by the nose by captured leaders and academics. And let's see, Phoebe Pup, learning about the pharmaceutical industry, especially in America in the past years, terrified me. If we don't manage to somehow stop this monstrosity, we are in a world of pain. Absolutely, Phoebe. What we have now is a pharma military industrial complex. Dr. Ivan Jardine, I cannot advise anyone to take the VX, knowing the lack of long-term studies with regard to side effects and seeing the injuries presenting after taking the VX. There's an honest, ethical doctor doing right by the Hippocratic oath. These are the doctors that we can respect. Right, I want to talk about employment issues because this is a really important aspect before we get into compensation. But just to also mention that the fact checkers that are checking the facts are funded by pharmaceutical industry. So those of you that rely on fact checkers and go, hey, but that was fact check. So, or you go to Google, which has stakeholders who own the pharmaceutical industry, and you say, oh, it wasn't on Google. That's because of who the shareholders are. I'm sorry to tell you this and to shatter your illusion, but fact checkers, the internet, search engines, social media, all of them have stakeholders in the pharmaceutical and by extension, the weapons and banking industry. It really is as insidious as that. So I want to talk about employment now because obviously this is an issue that is on everyone's mind. There are employers who are misinformed about the nature of these injections and whether they're necessary. Maybe they don't know about preventions and treatments, or they want to listen to a government that has a history of corruption, or they believe that they are protecting their employees and making it seem as if these injections are mandatory. So you either take it or you run the risk of being unemployed, or you'll have to wear an N95 mask to work here, or we'll put you into another position where you don't interact with people, which means unilaterally changing the terms of employment without proper consultation with the employee, without coercion, because now you're saying, well, you either accept it or you lose your job, given that we've got over 36% or over 30% at least unemployment in our country, statistically, lies in statistics, over 70% youth unemployment, and over 40% of our people go to bed hungry at night. Within that context, labor laws are now being adjusted, engineered to create a pressure on employers and employees. And this, of course, has a massive impact for the health of our country, but also for people remaining in employment. And it's very easy to say, well, just leave that job, go do something else. It isn't as simple as that. And certainly there are going to be cases that are going to go to court where employees are going to push back. And what I'm personally hoping for is employers are also going to push back. And as a group, as a collective, challenge the Department of Health, the minister, the government, and their handlers for what they're trying to force onto the people of our country, onto the poor and the working class. I'm just trying to find those particular comments here because they're quite important while you gather your thoughts on this aspect of employment and its impact. There were a couple of comments here, and I really think it's important for us to address it. Kashifa Pandey, how did we also go from voluntary to mandatory at places of work? The peer pressure and stigma is so overwhelming, as well as people doing it for simple reasons like travel. So where does voluntary leave people who decide not to take it? Let's start with Advocate Sabelo Sibanda.
Thank you very much. I think the most important thing is to go back to where we started, which is on the Constitution. any and every law or regulation or bylaw, whatever it is, at any level whatsoever, be it within government or the private sector, has to be weighed against its constitutionality. So this so-called mandatory aspect as regards to employers and employees, for as long as it does not pass the test of constitutionality, it's invalid and it's unconstitutional and is therefore unenforceable. So all these regulations that violate the Constitution are not of themselves law. And this directive that has been passed and given to employers to make the workplace safe, as we are made to believe, for as long as that safety is in violation of the Constitution, it is not valid. It is just a tool by which to exert pressure and make people feel guilty and exert people to a scenario where peer pressure is supposed to force them into making a particular decision. This is where the private sector becomes complicit and therefore cannot at a later stage, when the crimes against humanity are being put forward, they will not be able to escape. They are actually playing into that particular scenario. And Shabnam, it is not a mistake and it is not accidental that the budget for the CCMA has been cut. That's basically to ensure that when these cases, when the workers open their eyes and realize that, oh my goodness, we've been had or we're being had, let's then pursue the legal route and our starting point is the CCMA, they won't be able to get justice in the sense that justice delayed is justice denied. By the time their cases are heard within the context of a CCMA, which is underfunded and therefore fewer commissioners, it necessarily means that the whole thing has been structured in preparation for, because the budget of the CCMA is cut before this directive, because necessarily it is anticipated that people will now be coming up and taking their cases to the CCMA. So it's all part of the game as they see it. It's all part of the protection of their profits as they have structured it. So we are still in a position whereby, whether they like it or not, the scenario is that it is illegal for any directive to be in violation of the Constitution. So it is absolutely critical that workers realize that, firstly, their individual right to informed consent is guaranteed. And secondly, there is no employer who, within any context whatsoever, has the authority to override the prescripts of the Constitution of this country. And there is no law which Parliament can pass or any directive that can be recommended by a minister which can stand in the face of the violation of the Constitution. The Constitution will always prevail. So the difficulty that a lot of employees find themselves confronted with is the scenario that you were speaking to a few minutes ago, which is that people are under threat of losing their jobs in the here and now, regardless of that constitutional protection. And so again, we find ourselves in an environment where the law protects those who already have the resources and are able to engage the services of lawyers to protect their interests. But the message that some of us as human rights lawyers have been giving out as well is that this issue is not first and foremost about the money. It's about the protection of the rights of humanity. It's about the protection of the rights of every man, woman, and child to have their bodily and psychological integrity protected. And if that protection means that workers have to come together and actually approach lawyers who can assist them, there are lawyers out there who are ready and willing to give that sort of support. It's very good to have a platform like this where people get to know that the services are available, because what is compromising a lot of people right now is this belief that I'm the only one who is saying no to this, and on my own, what can I do about it? And you find that they don't even discuss with some of their colleagues because there is this concern that you will be seen as the one who is going against the grain. And the scenario is such that now there is that stigmatization. So it is necessary for workers to begin to stand up and say, no, this is my body. And one of the things that we have to also appreciate, these corporate entities that we are looking at are in that particular corporate space that they're in because they are looking at making profits. And there is no profit that they can make in the absence of the workers. So now, if the entire factory floor were to come up and say, no, I have an individual right and I am not accepting this. Yes, I agree that we need to have the workplace safe. And part of keeping the workplace safe should entail the employer being able to supply products that will boost the immunity of the workers, should enable workers to get access to ivermectin and therefore protect themselves. That is keeping the workplace safe. Keeping the workplace safe does not mean risking your life by offering yourself up for something that you do not know the long-term effects of, where there is actually evidence that people are dying, people are being paralyzed. And just as we speak right now, over the past week, the FDA in the United States has been issuing warnings about Johnson & Johnson, about this, I don't know how you pronounce it, Gilberan or something like that, this condition that has basically been associated with J&J. So it is important that people realize these things. And the bottom line, during the days of the struggle, there was always this thing that together we stand, divided we fall. The only time that we are going to succeed as a people is when we realize the strength that we have in our togetherness. It's when we realize the fact that for as long as we are kept divided, we will be focusing on the wrong things altogether and fail to appreciate the strength that we have in our unity. So it is time now for the workers themselves to begin to unite and stand strong against what is being perpetrated against them. Thank you, Shabnam.
Absolutely. Umuntu gumuntu gabantu. I am because you are. We are because of each other. Absolutely on point. And of course, if you're looking for kind of tools that you need to respond to an employer that is harassing, intimidating, coercing you, you can look at MIRIC on Facebook and on Telegram, my individual right to informed consent, and you will be provided with an informed consent guide, as well as notice of liability documents that you can present your employer with. Basically saying, I will consider taking this experimental injection if you agree that if A to Z happens to me, you will be held responsible. Read the document, please sign it, and then I'll consider whether I'm going to subject myself to this gene therapy, gene modification product. A couple of very important comments coming through here, but I want to turn the mic over to Noleen. Now, Noleen, I know you've got a comment on the employment aspect, which is really important, and on my mind is whether they're going to try and use Section 36 to limit the right to health, the right to bodily integrity, the right to dignity, the right to safety, whether they're going to try and do that. But I want to contextualize your comment by stating the following, that the injections have emergency use authorization. The only reason they have that, which allows them to be implemented anyhow, recklessly, dangerously, they don't care, is because they deny that preventions and treatments exist. Were they to admit preventions and treatments exist, and there are many, these injections would not have emergency use authorization, and they'd have to go through a proper safety process. And all of that impacts on us as human beings and as workers. Let's get your perspective, Noleen.
Well, there's a very good answer to this, I believe, especially in the terms of in the realms of the employment law. There's a common law rule that no employee can be forced or has to obey any rule or instruction that is unreasonable. Period. And what we're talking about in a court of law, in what you've now just said, it's easy to prove that because there is enough evidence to the fact that there are other prophylactics out there. There are numerous experts who can confirm this worldwide, and we've got wonderful experts in this country that can confirm that. So if anything, I can go into the legalities, which is not really going to be that helpful because people listening into this program are not are not all lawyers, will not understand it. But if I can give you one tip, if any employer comes to you and tries to force you to take the vaccine, based on what we've discussed here, based on the fact that you have the right to say, hang on, wait, I want to go find out the facts, or just let's do a shortcut and you, Mr. Employer, give me all the facts, give me everything and I know you must have it. If they refuse to do that, that is an unreasonable instruction. So in law, you are not, you cannot be forced to actually comply. If they fire you or dismiss you for that, in my opinion, that would go further than just a normal dismissal. That would go to not allowing you to enforce your rights in terms of the Labor Relations Acts and discriminating against you. And that goes not only in terms of the Labor Relations Acts, but also the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, the Employment Equality Act. All these acts work together, and it all comes down to discrimination. And that means an automatic unfair dismissal, which can go straight to the labor court. However, the court, prefers that matters like this are first conciliated in the CCMA and at the CCMA. And regardless of whether their budget has been cut or not, if you can show that you've attempted to go to conciliation or attended a conciliation meeting, and that fell through, because it's only conciliation. You cannot be forced to accept anything that your employer says. If that conciliation does fall through, you have direct access and a direct route to the labor court itself. Now, the thing with that is that it's time consuming, but if workers unite, I'm sure they can make this work. You do not have to, your employer has to give you all the facts. And let me be very clear. When COVID hit and the aspects regarding TERS came in and the assistance to help employers pay employees, I can tell you now that most employers jumped on that thing like a flea on a dog, because it went straight to their profit and how to deal with money and all that kind of thing, and who to pay and who not to pay. So I do not believe for 1 second that any employer out here, in the present circumstances that we are experiencing for more than a year now, has no knowledge of the real facts that are out there. For example, that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and all the other prophylactics that are proven to be effective, much more cost effective. I cannot and I will not be persuaded that they can stand back and say, sorry, we did not know. You have to take the jab. And then point number 2, as a comment was also made on this group now, that I was going to get to. Any employer that tries to force you to take the jab will have to face the consequences. Nuremberg Code, whatever. However, it doesn't matter if you are 10,000, number 10,000 in the list, but a list will be made. And we encourage employees to report that, so that you can start, so that we as lawyers and those attorneys out there that are willing to and able to assist have some basis to fall back on. For example, go to a police station and lay a charge, or write an email to your employer, get it on paper, make some form of record of exactly what happened, so that when you get to an attorney that can assist you or is willing to assist you, that attorney has something to work off.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that contribution, Noleen. And a comment from Dr. Evie Rapiti. Thank you, Shabnam, for an excellent show, and to the outstanding panel. We need more lawyers and advocates like you. Couldn't agree with you more. So it is a clarion call to the mediators, lawyers, and advocates out there to join us and get involved. Very important work. It's time for our profession to be heard for the sake of human rights and the very future of our country. And you'll be able to contact me via various platforms. You can drop me an email if you'd like, spmmediation@protonmail.com. And let's bring you into these panels. Let's have these conversations. Let's stop being afraid. And I want to turn the mic over to Conell now, because we need to shift the conversation to talk about compensation. And certainly we're going to need to have follow-up panels like these, because there's so much to talk about and so much to absorb. And certainly if you go to the SAVAZ site, www.savaz.co.za, you'll see there's a call to action specifically for legal professionals. So get involved, email me or go to the website and let's get involved. Let's have these conversations and let's help people not to feel alone. At the end of the day, our nation in itself needs to rise. Ricky Erasmus talking about the video with Dr. David Martin and lawyer Ryan Fumick. Very important video to watch regarding patents. Murik SA, you will see information here. From Teresa Schroeder, you can get guides and liability documents, some hashtags there, and how to contact info@miric.co.za, and the phone number is mentioned there as well in the comments section. Cheryl Haman Watson, yes, please do follow up. So this is so helpful. Thank you for the feedback. We appreciate it, and we are here to serve the nation. All right, Conell, I want to talk about compensation. I know there's a lot to talk about in terms of labor law, but let's have a round talking about compensation now. This government convinced us that they were going to put into place a compensation scheme a couple of months ago. Then when we started to make a noise about the fact that there was no public involvement, no public feedback process, no public consent, essentially rendering the entire scheme illegal, they then put out a gazette and gave people 5 days. 5 days to comment on a compensation scheme with massive implications. And so many people did comment as individuals. We encouraged them as an organization, as THJ, to submit their comments. We were the first organization to draft a response, but there were others. And solid contributions were made regarding this compensation scheme. And to date, and I've inquired with parliamentarians, even though apparently an announcement was made that the scheme is in place, according to parliamentarians, they've not seen a government gazette promulgating it formally, firstly. Secondly, when people ask SAPRA, what is the process? Where do people apply? No response. There's no website. There's no information in the media. There's no information from the Department of Health. There's no process. There's no application. There's no money. There's no money for this compensation scheme. Not that we're a poor country, but there's no money for this compensation scheme. And so people are being harmed. They're dying. They're being told it's unrelated to the jabs. In fact, there are healthcare professionals who are telling victims it's not related to the jabs, with zero investigation. And they also need to be held accountable, because that is scientific and medical fraud. But on this compensation scheme, there's nothing. No gazette, no website, no application process. Apparently a judge was appointed, but we've heard nothing about it. So in my opinion, this compensation scheme actually does not exist. It was used to bribe people, or lull them into a sense of false security, that in the minute event that I'm harmed in any way, there is this compensation scheme. Now, if you know anything about how these work in other countries like America, there are extensive processes. The other side has heavily paid lawyers. The chances of you getting compensation are slim to none. And in South Africa, they're even worse. In fact, we've never had a compensation scheme for other medical products that have harmed people in our country. So what are your thoughts, Conell, on this compensation scheme as a form of fraud that also needs to be used as a basis to halt the rollout of these experimental bioweapons?
Yeah, really good question, Shabnam. I could give you my overall opinion about it. It's a fantastic little scheme of spending money the country doesn't have. Because who's manufactured the product which puts the people at risk? A very real risk. It is the manufacturers. When have you ever heard of anything, any medical device or product that could be sold to you without recourse should anything or any part of it found to be not fit for purpose? No warranty. Okay? If it is the case, as it is put to the public, don't worry, this is safe. Well, if you're so sure about your product, why don't you put your money where your mouth is? Let's put that question again. Why doesn't the manufacturers put their money where their mouths are? Instead, your government now has to borrow money or make money available on the public's account to pay any member of the public who suffer an adverse event. So the government now looks as if though they're so generous to help you. Well, first of all, let me show you where the money, how this money is being wasted. They're purchasing a product which is more likely than not and evidently not entirely fit for purpose. And on that part, to substantiate the point, not fit for purpose. Because if you're saying, oh, this product is to help and protect people, you're taking that into the workplace and say, well, if you are not jabbed, you can't come to work. Well, why are people jabbed? Oh, it's to protect them. So if they're protected, why are they scared of people who are not jabbed? So the product is not fit for purpose. But hey, don't worry. If anything goes wrong, we'll pay you out. So now the whole public is being sucked into a complete exercise of a waste of money, putting your lives at risk, risking people losing their jobs. And what's more, business owners also needs to wake up themselves. This is a very subtle way of quite potentially destroying your business. If it hasn't occurred to you yet that your business is at risk of not being able to operate because of workers who rightfully decline participating in this medical experiment, even if it was legitimate treatment, that person does not have to take that treatment. An employer has the relationship between an employer and a worker is contractual. The days of slavery are long gone. The worker has not been purchased from a slave trader where the worker now is your property and you could do with that worker whatever you like. No, there's a contract. There are express terms, everything that's written down, and then there are implied terms and conditions. And now those implied conditions is what we want to touch upon, is that you shouldn't do anything that sort of you threaten to do something which is not in the best interest of your employer. Now, likewise, your employer is not to be doing or creating circumstances which are not to be in your best interest, which means your employer shouldn't be threatening you. It shouldn't be threatening you with little things. I'm going to create a little environment that is not suitable for you. Okay, that's probably grounds for constructive dismissal right there. When I keep telling you, despite your constitutional right, if you don't take this jab or participate in this experimental treatment because there's an emergency, you might lose your job. Well, hello. Section 37 of South African Constitution even protects that very right of yours not to participate in any medical trial or research, scientific, even in case of emergency. It is right there. So for your employer still to carry on like this is absolutely extraordinary. I don't know how they get away with this. So yes, you're absolutely right. More lawyers need to come to the fore. People need to stand up and know what their rights are. But this compensation scheme that the government is now wanting to be paying people, well, again, if you make a claim that you had suffered an adverse event or effect as a result of this injection, guess who the burden of proof is going to be on? It's going to be upon you. You're now going to have to employ medical scientists, brave ones. Good luck with finding them. There are very few about. To prove that point, they're going to need to be paid. Secondly, you're going to need to take your matter to court. You're going to have to pay lawyers. Good luck with finding them because there are very few brave ones about. And then in the end, you get paid out your little compensation. How much depends on, whether you're going to win at first of all. Because looking at the circumstances as they are right now, when we're talking about the medical establishment, medical and scientific establishment being captured, you're talking about medical and scientific professionals being fearful of being rational about what they know the truth is, because even their livelihoods are at stake. Now, you want to come and think that you can simply make a compensatory claim and that you're going to win. Even if you won, go back and consider, what is the biggest risk to you? Death. Death. What you're going to do with a lot of money when you're dead? You're too dead to spend anything. And I'm really sorry for, and I don't mean this insensitive, for people who's already lost their members of family. But this is it. You do ask yourself, I mean, what now? Are we simply going to play Monopoly with people's lives and say, okay, tell you what, how about Sabelo and Noleen, you guys go for the jab because you know you're at risk. We know you're at risk of dying. Shabnam and I will take up the case matter. Okay, this has become sadistic, isn't it? Because we know we can take money from the South African, and guess what? The South African public is just going to pay up. It's all their taxes, and we walk away with the money. How about that? This is what I mean. This is a fantastic little scheme to waste a lot of money, but now the government wants to come across as little angels. Oh, we will look after you, we'll compensate for you. Well, by the time you get that money, whatever change you get left of it, the value of the South African rand will amount to, I am really sorry to tell you, but the South African rand's value isn't exactly going up. Okay? So if you're in this for the money, you're in the wrong space. Revert right back to what Advocate Sabelo has said. This goes to the heart of your constitutional rights. And you know what's more? The Constitution only encodes your inviolable, inalienable rights. You don't even need the Constitution to put your point across to say, this is my body. I will not have an earring here, there, or anywhere. And neither do I want any form of injury. I don't care how good and fantastic it is. You can call it mRNA, RMNA, spike protein, how spiky it is. I don't care how cool it is. You can offer me a slice of pizza with it. No, thank you. And that is the grounds which you need to move back to, because quite often we find ourselves, Shabnam, is how you confuse a participant as you lull them into a false sense of security and you advance the conversation. We don't even have to be at the conversation about compensation, because we have literally now, we've implied, yes, we are, we're halfway there. We've already participated. And now the only thing we seem to need to be talking about is compensation. No. This conversation is not necessary. We don't need that. You're only putting the public purse more into debt, and the winners is not the South African public at all. Okay? You simply need to wipe out all of this conversation. That agreement that was struck with AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and possibly with Pfizer, and now you're talking about Sinovac, all of these companies from the outside, you're signing more money away. Okay, if it isn't clear to you yet that ministers in your government are operating conflict of interest, okay, they're not acting in the best interest of the public. It is evident more than 95% of people recover without the need of extraordinary intervention. Doctors have got prophylactic treatment and treatment which is effective even in the course of presenting any of these symptoms. It is only that your government isn't fulfilling their statutory obligation further to Section 6 of the National Health Act 63 of 2003. You now need Advocate Sabelo, Noleen, other platforms to tell you about your right. Your government has that statutory obligation and duty to you. And what's more, if you have a doctor that comes to tell you, hello, my darling, you have a right to decline this, they want to sanction that doctor. And then also they're giving the right to social media companies that it is okay for them to shut you up, despite the fact of your constitution giving you the freedom of expression, freedom of speech, even on a platform such as this. But this people tell you you're breaching our community standards. But hello, they are in your community, and your community standard says you have the freedom of speech.
Exactly.
It confounds logic, and we don't even need to lose our knickers about that. Bottom line is, keep your cool, stay calm, say thank you for your offer, but no thank you.
Absolutely. The problem is that some people have taken these bioweapon products and are in a state of panic and terror, is the best way to describe it based on the reports that we're getting to Surveyors. And of course, Surveyors will be working very closely with MIRIC, my individual right to informed consent. In this last round, I want to get into that compensation scheme in itself, and I'm going to highlight some of its problematic, to put it mildly, provisions, and get your comments on this compensation scheme, because people think that they have the sense of security and because people think the scheme even exists. But here's a very important comment here. Shirley Miles, the DSD couldn't and haven't even paid many the 350 Rand. How will they pay millions in adverse events and death injuries, right, from that compensation scheme? Such an important point. Moira T responds, and they'll use coercion or blackmail, no jab, no 350. That could very well happen. Now, we've seen the desperation involved in people having to loot food because they're hungry. How easy it is to convince those same people will reinstate the 350 if you take these jabs. There's no level of diabolic that the predators will not go to. So I want to now explore this compensation scheme so people understand how we've been defrauded and how there is no informed consent, because that formed part of the package to make you think that your consent was valid, and it's not. So we submitted a very quick 3-page submission. Nobody got a response, by the way. I don't believe anybody on the other side even read the responses to this bill. And so it first points out, legal issues, blurring of lines between the NCCC and Cabinet, a High Court judgment in June last year that a significant number of regulations are unconstitutional. We spoke about the COVAX fund being held hostage as a country, having only 5 days to respond is ludicrous. And of course, specific terms and conditions within this bill, including firstly, the public is expected to fund compensation for pharmaceutical companies which are heavily subsidized, might we add. And then specific provisions, section 93 states that the funds for the scheme consist of funds also accruing from any other sources. Does not specify what those sources are, right? They could be from the feeding scheme for children in ECD schools that are currently starving. Who knows? Nobody cares, right? Could be anything. Housing, water, electricity, education, pension funds. Deliberately vague, so government can avoid accountability on behalf of their handlers. Section 93. Section 92(4), these directives have still to be made, so they were not in the bill. Requirements relating to the administration of the scheme, the policy in respect of the administration, the reporting of vaccine injection injuries, which is why we put surveyors into place. We can't depend on them. The claim system, the reporting of claims, any other matter relevant for the effective, efficient, and fair administration of the scheme. 92(4). None of that is actually specified. 92(5), they talk about an adjudication panel, compromising of experts, but there's zero mention of a civil society representation or nomination process to be on that panel. So it's all them, and it's none of us. 93(2), compensation scheme only for severe injuries resulting in permanent or significant injury or serious harm to a person's health, other damage, or death. Definitions not made clear, but of course, who defines what severe injuries, damage, or well, death is quite easy, but who defines what severe actually is, right? And of course, we know that far fewer people report than are injured for various reasons. People are too sick, they're too embarrassed, they feel like, what's the point? They don't know they can report, etc., etc. Convenient, isn't it? 93.4, none of this information is provided. Who is eligible? What injuries are covered? Which injections are covered? Who are these facilities that are covered? Because they've given immunity even to the facilities. Imagine that. Types of claims, timeline and duration of injury, what duration of jabs will be covered, processes and requirements, how long you have to institute a claim. 94, the amounts and structure of the scheme are not determined, not even provided for public participation. So we don't even know what the amount is, what the structure is, none of that. 95.1, claimants may not approach a court for relief until the scheme has adjudicated. So you can't go to a court until the scheme adjudicates on whether you have a right at all to any compensation. Now, given the historic ineptitude of managing processes, for example, involving children's rights or the road accident fund, how are we expecting this adjudication to go in a country where the majority cannot afford the services of a lawyer or medical experts, as Conell mentioned? 95.3, big pharma indemnity. The process, even a court process, would not be against the product provider, but against government, meaning against yourselves, sue yourselves, right? That's basically what people are doing. 95.4, and this is the last page, the blanket indemnity also covers any organ of state, mystery, service provider, health establishment, or person causing this injury or death. 96, there's no public representation to decide on what the undefined period for expiry of claims is. There's no definition for when this period of expiry is, or when the escalation of the state of disaster that we're in is mitigated, minimized, or alleviated. Lovely use of words that the average person would never be able to understand deliberately. And in terms of accountability, given the pandemic of corruption, there's nothing in that bill about protection of the fund from fraud and corruption. Absolutely nothing. We know that even if the fund exists, the scheme exists, it's going to be looted. And this in a country where the budget for health decreases by 1% per year, at least. Context. And in a situation where we don't trust the public health authority, there's no transparency. We talk about in America, 4.4 billion in 2020 via their compensation scheme. That's roughly 48% of claimants at great personal cost. And all of this, of course, amounts to a form of state capture. So that's just some of the highlights from the scheme that government has allegedly put into place to fraudulently extract informed consent. Let's get your comments, Sabelo.
Thank you very much, Shabnam. I think you have addressed the most critical aspects as pertained to the scheme. And I love the word scheme, actually, because when people are scheming, they're doing devious things. So this is some devious mechanism by which to steal innocent taxpayers' money in the name of helping them and compensating them. So you see, where the devious aspect for me starts, it's in the vocabulary that is being used, in the sense that from what we are told, this is supposed to be a scheme which in itself is supposed to address compensation to people who have suffered injury as a result of a COVID-19 vaccine. So we have to start at the beginning. We have a vaccine. Necessarily, we don't. And so what it means is that for anyone and everyone who is injured right now, even if the scheme were in place, they cannot get up and say, I am enjoying protection under this particular scheme, because the scheme only comes to life when there is a vaccine, so to say. But at the moment, we just have an experimental jab which has not qualified as a vaccine. We don't have an injury compensation scheme due to experimentation. If that scheme that they were talking about was due to experimentation, it would cover people right now, those who are participating in the trial. And those are amongst the primary requisites of any trial, that there must be a scheme to protect the participants. But in this particular scenario, no, it's not there. So effectively, for the people who are in this particular trial, who have offered themselves up to be experimented upon, they are not protected. Even if it were to come to life tomorrow, they would not be protected. And you know that the section 96 that you spoke to about the duration, it's structured in such a manner that it is restricted to the period in time where there is a so-called disaster, where there is a so-called pandemic. But what does that say for the injuries that will manifest themselves a week along the line, 2 months along the line, a year along the line? So the duration of this thing would have been closed already, because it does not say that the people will be monitored. Whereas when you look at the documentation that all these people signed onto under emergency use authorization, they actually said they will monitor the participants for a minimum period of 2 years. So effectively, if we were to make sense of what is being said, the scheme should have covered the people who are participating in the trial, and saying that for those people who have participated in the trial, it will continue to cover them for a minimum period of 2 years, whilst the monitoring is still taking place. And then after that, it would then be a vaccine scheme. So we are caught in a crazy situation, Shabnam, where we have pharmaceutical companies who have put up vaccine candidates. What we have out there are actually candidates. They cannot be classified as vaccines. I used an example recently of elections. We've got elections which are supposed to come up for the local government. You can put yourself forward as a candidate for election. It does not mean you are already a mayor, a councillor, or whether ward councillor or PR councillor or whatever. It simply means you are a candidate because you intend to occupy that particular office should you be voted in. So what we have currently are vaccine candidates, which will basically get to the status of being a vaccine on a proof that they actually do what they purport to do, which goes to the point that Conell was talking about, as to whether these things actually address what they claim to be able to address, which in actual fact they don't. So now we are in a scenario where they put up their product, which is still at candidate stage, and as against them paying for all the logistical costs involved in the study that they are performing. They are saying we as the taxpayers must take responsibility for their experiment. And they are the ones who are benefiting from the results of this experiment, benefiting in the sense that they are able to continuously monitor. If this thing were to be done from a genuine perspective, they would be monitoring to say, okay, maybe we put a bit of too much graphene oxide. Let's cut down on the graphene. And maybe the spike protein is, let's increase it a bit. Let's take it down. That is how the whole thing would be a genuine exercise. So they are benefiting in as far as their intellectual property is concerned. And at the same time, they are benefiting in as far as the monetary value, because they are literally making billions and billions of dollars by getting the people to participate in a project that they should be paying for themselves. And it doesn't make sense for government in our name to say they've entered into non-disclosures, because they're supposed to be there representing us. An agent is responsible to the principal by virtue of the fact that we voted and these people occupy these offices. They are our agents. We are the principals. The agent cannot turn around today and say, no, I will not disclose the contents of the contract. You just have to perform. You, the principal, just have to perform. It doesn't make sense. There is no legality in that scenario at all. And so what is basically at stake here is that there cannot be any vaccine compensation scheme. And interestingly, Shabnam, you touch upon a point that I've been wondering on, because there's some MPs that I've also approached, and some have actually spoken face to face, trying to understand where exactly this particular scheme is at within its evolutionary process within Parliament. Not one can give you an answer.
Yes.
Not one can tell you where it is. It doesn't make any sense. So we are caught in an interesting scenario here, whereby firstly, the nation has to realize that the taxpayer cannot, should not, and shall not take responsibility for funding J&J, Pfizer, Sputnik, Sinovac, or whoever for them to come and experiment on us. On the contrary, they should have been made to put up a fund to say anyone gets injured, they are going to tap into that fund. And no one has to prove that it's as a result of their jab. As soon as I can say I was jabbed and these are the effects, and there is a medical practitioner who can basically confirm that, I should be entitled to compensation from them, not from government. So basically, their investment is protected through and through. And the thing is about this whole compensation scheme is that it also protects them in as far as criminality is concerned. They're basically covered. They're just laughing all the way to the bank and back, whilst people are being made poorer and poorer and poorer on a daily basis. And people are not getting the services that they're supposed to get from government, because, as you said earlier, they can get the money from any other source. Even if that source means taking away food from children, then that is justified, just so that these people can protect their profits. No, it doesn't make sense. So anyways, that is how I see it, Shabnam. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that comment from Kashifa Pandey. Exactly. Doesn't that compromise our safety and security through non-disclosure agreements with big corporate and big pharma? Also saying that government gives more security and protection to themselves than the citizens. Noleen, Your comment on this compensation bill, anything that Sabelo's contributed, and also a very specific question for you. How can, I'm not going to ask you can, how can these stakeholders that have led us to this point in our history be sued in their personal capacities for what they've done to us, whether that's government officials, pharmaceutical companies, whoever has been complicit in the disinformation, fraud, and harm? How can they be held accountable?
Okay, let's start. First, before I answer your question, just to Sabelo gave a very, very good answer. I'm sitting here thinking and listening to what you said. And first of all, if you are faced once again with craziness in wording and as wide as the sky, then you know something is up, number one, because you can't pin anything down, you can't define anything. They can change the goalposts because it's built into the compensation scheme. My first question would be, why would you need to set up a compensation scheme for an injury, for a so-called, let's call it an injection, that you sell as being safe? Doesn't make sense. If I sell you a car that has not really been tested, but I tell you, no, don't worry, it's safe, it's fine. No, but hang on, I'm going to sell you, and you're going to have to pay for it. Compensation fund, you're going to have got to put money down in case the brakes of this car fails. What does that tell you? So wake up, people. And so there's method in their madness, but also madness in their method. And one has to actually start thinking mirror. One has to start turning things around, because, as I said before, it's agenda. With agenda, there is no logic. So, with all due respect for any lawyer or anyone to even start to try and unravel this is a waste of time and energy, because it's been put together to fulfill an agenda and to push an outcome which is one-sided only. As to your question as to how people can be held accountable, first of all, as I said, fraud virtuates everything and anything, and it goes right down to criminality. You cannot hide behind any corporate veil or any. If you put yourself out there, let's start with the least accountability. If you make a representation, especially coming from someone, you put yourself out there as a kind of an expert, right? And the government is putting themselves out there as an expert, as medical experts, because they are mandating this jab, or they're forcing this jab. So in effect, what they are doing, they are saying, we have got all the evidence to support that what we're doing is reasonable. We know what we are doing is right. So we are actually the experts. That is the platform from which we are launching this, and where we give ourselves the authority to actually force it on you, right? So if you misrepresent, or you make a representation to someone, and that person acts on that representation to their prejudice, when the pawpaw hits the fan, you who made the misrepresentation, and when you are sued because by the person that has suffered the injury or has acted on that representation, because you said that is what the case is, that person acted on that representation to their prejudice. The doctrine of what we call in legal terms, the doctrine of estoppel arises. That means the party who has made that representation on which that led to the detriment of the person acting on it, that party cannot now turn around and say, oh, sorry, actually, it was a misrepresentation. Sorry, it's not the truth. So estoppel arises. That is in that's a civil remedy that one has. Advocate Sabelo is welcome to assist me here, or if I'm off course, but I don't believe I am. But to answer your question, criminally, if you do something premeditated with premeditation, you know there is danger. You know, and as Dr. Rapiti has said, there is evidence that other, as I call it, medicine or procedures or vaccines or whatever were stopped after a few people died. And I agree, one person dying is enough, but a few people died. There is so much evidence out there now of so many people having died because of this, and yet, and despite, it is not being stopped. Criminal responsibility stares you in the face. And in terms of even just the common law, let's talk Nuremberg trials. Let's talk, as Advocate Sabelo said, bringing it home in terms of the ICC. If you push the people far enough and the people wake up, and God forbid that we have a judiciary that is bought, or we have people that just don't do what they took the oath to do, then we're in trouble. However, I do believe there are more than enough good people, and I'm asking, and I'm reaching out as we are to lawyers and to legal practitioners as we are now known. Please, our country is in dire straits. The world is, but we can fight for our country. Please, put your services out there. Forget about the money. It's not about the money. Please, people need your help. Step up to the plate, because this is the only legacy that you are going to be able to leave. Do something good with your training. You have been misled to a great extent as to what is really going on, what the system is that has been imposed not only on this country but on the whole world. It's a system. It's a corporation within a corporation within a corporation within a corporation. If you've woken up to the fact that you have been misled, that all those hundreds of thousands of rands that you've paid for your educations, the untold amount of hours that you have studied, the bones that you've broken, the nose, the blood that you've bled to get where you are. If there's only 1 ounce of integrity in your body, professional integrity, wake up and stand up and fight, because that is the profession that you chose. And there are people who cannot speak for themselves. Those people who can research, wonderful, but we often lose sight of people that just cannot speak for themselves. People that are so indigent, people that have been abused and used and forced into such poverty levels that people like you and me can never even understand. So there we have a duty, and woe to those who ignore that duty. It's not for us to judge, but it is a terrible thing to fall into the hands of the living God.
Thank you for that very powerful, emotive, and meaningful clarion call issued there by Noleen. Really, I hope lawyers, legal practitioners are listening out there, the activists, the journalists, civil society, everyone. And before we turn over to Conell for the last question of this absolutely brilliant, must-watch, must-share panel, I want to just mention very quickly that if you would like to be on a similar panel of legal-minded professionals and people, please drop me an email, spmmedia@protonmail.com. If you would like to join the International Legal Alliance for Health, which my colleague, Advocate Sabelo Sibanda, is also a part of with me, drop me an email, spmmediation@protonmail.com. If you would like to join the legal action that we are talking about now for the sake of our nation and by extension the people of the world, go to the SAVAR's website, www.SAVAERS. There's a specific button call to action for legal professionals. Click on that button, get into contact with us, and let's start mobilizing as human rights lawyers in our country. And our very last question for this comprehensive, just over 2.5-hour panel is going to be for Conell. Conell, Saturday the 24th is the Worldwide Freedom Rally Day, right? All of us know it. It's also been declared World Ivermectin Day. So if you were standing at this rally in front of the people of the UK and by extension, people of the world, what would be your message?
You don't need to take back your rights. You already have it. And you mentioned a point about to legal professionals. Also, Noleen raised that point further to what Sabelo had said. Well, people need to wake up. The legal trained community is that the natural course of justice has actually been reversed very subtly. That people are now being considered guilty and having to prove themselves innocent. Wake up, because the same now applies in healthcare. So talking to medical scientific professionals who either are unaware, scared, or uninformed. So this is not aimed at you personally. It's a matter of having to process information. You now are expected to consider a patient unhealthy until they can prove themselves healthy. What a complete and utter waste of time. What a complete and utter waste of your personal integrity. But more than that, an undermining of your professional courage and your professional integrity. Okay? Because as it is right now, it is considered, even by the Department of Basic Education to the teachers, they say they consider anybody not injected with this jab is a risk that they spread the V quicker or easier than those who are jabbed. So when you read the line, what they're saying is, well, the people who are jabbed only just spread it slightly slower than the other people. So they're all spreading it. This is some weird virus. Then you have to ask yourself, what is the point of the jab? Think on that long and hard. What is the point of your judiciary if you cannot bring a rational inquiry to the judiciary? The judiciary instead tells you it's not urgent to answer the question. However, it is urgent to carry on with the very perpetration the question seeks to unravel. It doesn't get any more confusing than that. It also boils down to the point of saying, say, for instance, you raised the point about on a compensation, and I love that you've read all those sections of the bill. This bill is an advancement of the irrational, because they've gone past the first point, which they hadn't answered. They consider this to be a V, that jab, which it isn't. It isn't. But yet they have advanced the argument. So it sounds like saying, look, we've got a knife here and we want to stab you. I just said, no, but that's not allowed. That's criminal. So their response is, okay, how about this knife then? And now you think, haven't you heard me in the first? I don't want to be stabbed. Oh, come on, it's not that bad. This one is not so sharp. Or this one's, I tell you what, we've got a new set of knives that's just come. Yeah, special promotion. And you can choose which of these ones you want to be stabbed with. And now you suck.
Yep.
This is where you literally are at right now. So people need to wake up and go right back and say, excuse me, I don't need any of this. I don't even need the Constitution to protect me, because if I cannot even rely on the justice system, which is why people now call it the injustice system, to protect me, then what is left is now for people to come back and take and be aware of their rights and take that matter of control. As for Saturday 24th, Shabnam, yes, I am so ready. And it is important for people to remember there's nothing to take back. It is to emphasize that you have the right and freedom. That is what the protesting is about. Because what the political establishment, as it has been for the number of decades, had been, is that they allow you to protest. They even provide us police escorts, and they happily come around with their cameras. I'll show you on my live, and I'll talk. And they're there to make sure that nobody harms you, unless it's a police officer that's not very well informed about his duties to serve and protect. But once it's over, right? Once it's over, they're back into Parliament, and they start talking again, and they start talking their nonsense again. So now that you've had your opportunity to so-called protest, and say, you see, this is how democratic we are. We allow you to protest, and then we have last say. So the advantage have gone to the city. Yeah. Listen, you've got to stand there. All of this information that you've just received here. Shabnam, I recommend many of your pages to many of our listeners too. All knowledge, yeah, is not power. It is the application of this knowledge. That is the power. So all
Absolutely.
you need to do is to say no, and say, this is my arm. I am not interested. And the next time you send me a text message, I don't want to have that. Remove my number from your database. I've sent you a conversation that I've had with people here locally. And as it turns out, they're being given scripts. Right? So we are surrounded by a lot of irrational things going on. And so I'm looking forward to Saturday 24th, and I will send some information out. I'll go live for people to see that it is actually real. I'm a human being. I'm not alien. I'm for real. I know I'm appearing on a screen, but I'm really real. If you believe Palesa exists, she's real, I am just as real, because I'm talking here. I'm actually responding to her questions live. Yeah? Shabnam, I just wanted to say something about these fact checkers that you said earlier on.
Right.
About the fact checkers. Be aware of fact checkers. They're not really checking facts. Okay, they're just sowing doubt. Say, for instance, I would say the host of SPM Media is Shabnam Mohamed. They will come and say that is partially false information. Do you know what? They're right, because I didn't put her middle name in. So they will say this is a Shabnam Palesa Mohamed show. So that justifies them stating that I've given you partially false information. Okay? So
it's an absolute cesspool. Thank you,
Take
Conell, for that
notice.
very valuable contribution. I'm mindful that we're approaching 3 hours, and I promise we're going to do follow-up conversations. Noleen would just like to offer one last comment there, Noleen.
I just also want to just say something that is quite obvious in light of what's happened in our country specifically. It is important for people to do this peacefully. Please, people, no looting, no violence. You cannot fight fire with fire, and do not go down to their level. So whenever this happens and however this happens, and when people get together wherever, please, this is not only for yourself, it's for your children. Let's do it peacefully and not aggressively.
Thank you, Noleen. The Worldwide Freedom Rally is always conducted in a peaceful, constructive, and a really beautiful way. So we're really looking forward to that. And of course, it's also World Ivermectin Day. And we'll be hosting a 12-hour broadcast with doctors from around the world speaking about their experiences. And I'll proudly be hosting a panel representing the African continent. I'm really excited about that. Hoping to get a chance to speak in Durban as well. So juggling a couple of things. I want to start saying goodbye now, but quick question for Sabelo. The events of the last week, to me, say that the South African people have declared the lockdown over. Yes or no?
Yes, they have, basically. And the good thing is that that's why it led to the amendment of the regulations on gathering.
Exactly.
Yeah, they have. It goes back to basically a point that has been mentioned in the past on different platforms, that it is only through our consent that these things continue. The day we withdraw our consent is the day we will begin to experience our God-given freedom.
Absolutely. And I want to say a massive thank you to this brilliant panel for your time, your energy. It's been inspiring, informative, empowering, and a very stimulating discussion. I'm certain that people are going to continue sharing it. We'll be sharing the link directly to this broadcast later on this evening. Get it out there. Thank you again to Advocate Sabelo Sibanda, Noleen Lee, and Colin Loggenberg, not only for being on the People's Voice, but for being a voice for the people.
Thank you very much, Shabnam. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be on the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You.
God bless
Lovely
everybody.
to be
Take care.
God
Thank
bless.
you. Power of the people is stronger than people in power. And as we remove our colleagues and friends from the stream until the next time, thank you again to our brilliant guests, Advocate Sabelo Sibanda, Noleen Lee, and Conell Loggenberg for joining us on The People's Voice. Thank you also to our listeners, our viewers, and our supporters around the world. Remember to share this broadcast and beat that censorship. Until the next episode of The People's Voice, we'll be seeing you on Saturday, Worldwide Freedom Day and World Ivermectin Day, www.worldivermectinday.org. That's the website you need to visit for details on that event. Remember to stay informed, stay healthy, stay empowered, because the power of the people is stronger than people in power. Revolutionary peace. Good night. Take care.